Hello and welcome to Positive Leadership Podcast. Today, my guest career journey is nothing short of extraordinary. She started out as an engineer and rose through the ranks to become a top executive in the tech industry. She spent over 2 decades at Qualcomm, where she helped pioneer mobile technology and then joined Microsoft as Executive Vice President of Business Development. In 2020, she took on a bold new challenge as CEO of Magic Leap, guiding this AR innovator through a pivotal turnaround. Today, she is the CEO of Agility Robotics, leading cutting-edge work in humanoid robotics. On a personal note, it's a delight to have her on the show because we are close colleagues, actually, together on Microsoft senior leadership team a few years back under Satya Nadella. And I've seen firsthand the positive energy she brings to every endeavor every single day. Peggy Johnson, everyone, welcome to the Positive Leadership Podcast. Great to see you back.
Thank you, Jean-Philippe. It's wonderful to see you as well. And thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. So one thing I do, Peggy, when I start this conversation is to reflect again on the early experiences that shaped my guests, some great leaders. So let's start at the very beginning of your story, Peggy. What was it like for you growing up? Who were the biggest influencers in your childhood that helped you shape the person and leader that you are today?
Well, thank you. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was one of 15 children, which is
15, 1-5, right?
1-5, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a rugby team, actually. In Europe, it's a rugby team.
It is, with some backup players. It's
Yes.
quite a story. I was actually one of 8 children, and when I was the second youngest. When I was about 3, my father passed away, and a few years later, my mom remarried a man who had 7 children, and his wife had passed away. And so they had a lot in common. We all moved into one house in Los Angeles, which wasn't that big looking back now. We had multiple kids in the rooms. But probably my biggest influences along the way were my parents. They were so hardworking. They taught us a work ethic. We all had jobs through school. And they had 2 rules. One was, you will go to college. And the second rule was, you will pay for it yourself. So we all went to college. And it was a lot of fun, though. It was great to grow up with 14 siblings.
Wow. So what was it like for you to be number 2, right, in the family in terms of responsibility, I guess, right? Taking care of some of your younger brothers or sisters.
I was actually the second youngest. I was the other
second
way.
youngest. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think they took care of me quite a bit. But, I wasn't the oldest or the youngest. I was one of the middle ones. And that teaches you a type of responsibility as well. And I tend to be rather quiet because there was a lot of big voices in our household. So I became a listener and a learner, and just sat back and watched. And that was very formative as well in those early years.
Any particular memory you would have of some of the, dinners with the family or moments of joy that you had with this big family, extended family?
Well, it was always joyful. It really was. But the thing that I loved is my parents. You had to be home at 6:30 for dinner. If you weren't there, you didn't get dinner. So that was another rule. And we used to have great debates over dinner time. And my stepdad, who I always just think of as my dad, he's the only father I ever knew. He was a Democrat and my mom was a Republican. And we used to have the most fascinating conversations, but, healthy debates. And we could literally bring up any topic. And the discourse was always lively and fun around the table. I rarely got a chance to speak because I was second youngest, but I did learn a lot by watching. And those moments were so much fun. And I learned about healthy debate, and we could use more of that right now in our society. But it was always fun and a learning experience really for both sides.
Yes. No, it must have been fun as well, and very educative as well in terms of forming an opinion, right? And as you said, listening, engaging in a dialogue, a debate where parties are not necessarily in agreement, but are still able to share the same dinner together.
Yeah, exactly. And I always found it very educational to understand why someone felt the way they did about a certain topic. And it was always a
Hmm.
learning experience. And I think that's where we could use more of that type of debate where you don't just shut the door and say, I don't align with you, so I won't listen anymore, but you dig in a bit. And once you
Hmm.
understand why they feel that way, it oftentimes makes a lot more sense. And you realize likely you're a little bit closer to the topic than you thought you were. There isn't quite the gap that everyone thinks there is.
For sure. I'm sure a great learning that is serving you well in some of your CEO discussion today.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, you have to listen first.
Yeah. So staying with that early period of your life, Peggy, you choose to pursue electrical engineering in college, which even today is not a path necessarily of a lot of young women, right? On
Right.
the show, I actually welcome a couple of years ago someone you may know or not, Reshma Sojani. She's the founder of the nonprofit Girls Who Code, and I know
Yes.
she's been empowering more than 750,000 young girls with technology and STEM in the US over the last few years, which was wonderful. So I'm picturing you as a young engineering student in the 80s. I guess often the only woman in the lab, right, or meeting, which you'll later experience in
Almost
your
always.
career too. Oh yes. So what motivated you to enter the tech engineering field, despite again the gender barriers and being alone in a room or in the lab? And what was this experience for you, actually? What did it look like for you?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I loved math and science. I took all the science classes I could, all the math classes I could, the highest levels. I really enjoyed it. But before you graduate from a public school in Los Angeles, you would meet with
Mm.
a guidance counselor that would help you pick out, if you're going to college, what degree you would focus on.
Yep.
So I told her all this, and never once did the word, why don't you become an engineer, come out of her mouth. It was always, well, how about business? I think you'd be great in business. So I said, okay, I'll become a business major. I went off to school and was a business major, and I was a freshman, and I had a job on campus because I had to put myself through school.
Yep.
that was
Yep.
the rule, and they gave me a job to deliver mail, and I was delivering mail to the engineering department.
Hmm.
And as I was walking down the hallway, the two executive assistants could hear me coming, and they could tell it was a woman coming because of I had sandals on. And I get there and they said, "Are you here to sign up?" And I said, "No, just here to deliver the mail." And they sat me down and they talked me into changing my degree to engineering. And I remember they
Wow.
said, "The world will be your oyster if you choose
Wow.
engineering." And it really has, because I really think of it as a problem solving type of degree. It really helps
Yes.
you work your way through any kind of problem, whether that's technical or business. And so off I went and became electrical engineer. But you're right, through college and really through most of my early career, I was almost
Hmm.
always the only woman in the room. Very few
Well,
women.
that so those people, I'm sure, I mean, in a way, had a very important role in your career, right, Peggy? Those people that to whom you are delivering the mails. Do you
Yes.
remember actually one or two of them and the kind of discussion you had at the time?
Yeah, I remember because everything was paper back then. So they gave me the
Yeah.
papers. I filled them out and brought them back in the next day. And they said, "We just see so few women down this
Hmm.
hallway. And we do think if you pursue this career, you can go in so many directions." And they really drew the line to what you can
Hmm.
do with an engineering degree. Of course, this was well before so many of the
Yes.
innovations today.
Yeah.
But they talked about being able to apply it in medicine, in
Mm.
uh, areas like science. And
Yep.
when I had thought of an electrical engineer, I used to just think just hardware, circuit
Yep.
boards, that sort of thing. But
Mm.
they took it all the way to the end product or service. And that's what made it really come alive for me and got me excited about it and really kept me in when it got tough. And engineering was very tough. It
For
was
sure.
secluded on the campus. It was away from all the frat houses and everything was on the other end of campus.
Yes.
Very, very quiet and studious over there. And that's where I spent my years. And
Yeah.
it was, the best decision I'd made at that point in my life, really.
No, and what's exciting in this story, Peggy, is the way you also built your own confidence, right, in pursuing that engineering field, which was not a given at all, again, back in those days for women. It's still not, by the way, today. So I'd like us to discuss also about some of the people like mentors who open doors and encourage you to claim your voice when you are, again, the only woman in the room. Those nudges can reroute a life. We know that, and at many guests where we had such examples. So love to know, at Qualcomm, you also shifted closer to customers and business, but translating tech into solutions. What did those early career experiences and mentors really help shape who you are today, Peggy?
Right. So one of the first ones was when I was at General Electric. That was sort of an internship that turned into a year or
Hmm.
two out of college before I moved over to Qualcomm. But interestingly, I had a female manager at the time,
Hmm.
and her name was Emily Turner, and I actually ended up calling our daughter Emily and named her after
Because of
her.
her.
Yes, yes, and she was she hired a lot of female engineers and computer scientists at the time, and she gave us so much confidence and
Hmm.
would talk about that's going to be tough out there. You're often going to be the only female in the room. But she was also quiet. She was a listener. She was a learner. And she said, if you could just keep your
Yeah.
ear to the ground, you will, succeed. And don't don't allow the environment to change you. Just be
Hmm.
true to yourself. There were such words of wisdom. And at the time, we were all worried about it. I remember the handful of women that we used to band together and have lunch together and say, "Are we in the right field or not?" And whenever our confidence was lagging, we'd go back to Emily, and she'd give us a booster, and we would get that pep talk that kept us going. So she was definitely one. And then at Qualcomm, it was if it was
Yep.
possible to have even fewer female, I think there was only one other female employee, except for some
Wow.
executive assistants who were
Yeah.
wonderful. But in the tech
Yeah.
department, there was one other woman. And I remember it was very tough. It was a
Hmm.
fast moving industry. It was the early
Hmm.
days of mobile phone. There were a lot of big voices in the room, and I was not one of
Yeah.
them. And I remember getting my performance review, and the all of the traits that they marked us
Hmm.
on were traits I didn't have. I felt like, you know, assertiveness and
Yes.
speaking up in a room and things like that. And so I would get marked
Wow.
down for those. And I remember going to my manager at the time and who was a guy, and I said,
Hmm.
look, I don't think this industry is for me. I am definitely going to move away from the industry. And he
Yeah.
said, nope, nope, let me understand this, right? And so I said, I have things to say. It's hard for me
Hmm.
to say it in a room of a
Yes.
lots of voices. But so he was the one who said, you know use use whatever channels you have.
Hmm.
Drop by someone's office. Back then we didn't have mobile phones. You just picked up the phone on
Yeah.
your desk, call
Yeah.
someone,
Yeah.
and go to lunch with them. You can get your opinion across through other channels.
Hmm.
And he also went to our HR department and changed the rating and added
Wow.
things like,
Wow.
yeah, like building teams. I was
Wow.
good at building teams. He added those sorts of traits to the things that
Hmm.
that we were all reviewed on. And really, it started a
Hmm.
trend where the company, well before it was a thing, was
Yeah.
more open and more able to attract people of all types. And I think it was very powerful for building talent at Qualcomm. That one
Well,
change.
that's an exciting story. I mean, he was, in a way, creating, shaping what was then called later on diversity, right? And equity.
Yes.
I know those words are not used anymore in the US these days, but
Not so
if
much.
I can tease you on that a little bit, but it looks like he understood actually what it means to be part of the minority, right, in a room, and shape different expectations about different voices being heard in the room, which is fantastic. So
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
great.
The other thing he said was, I'm going to throw you the ball every now and then, using a sports analogy. And it worked. So he would open the space for me to say something in a meeting and turn to me and say,
Mm,
Peggy, do you have any thoughts on this? And that was easier to get, a word in edgewise in
yes.
front of a bunch of type A's for me. And I really appreciated that. And then that became part of the standard
Mm.
course as our management courses as we went forward at Qualcomm. So it was all good stuff that he advocated well before there was DE&I. So I'm glad he did. It shaped me.
No, that's fantastic. So what are some of the key lessons, Peggy, that you learn in two legendary companies, right? GE and Qualcomm as well, during your 24 years in those two companies, that guide you still today in the way you lead, maybe teams, and the way you think about business issues and strategy? If you had to pick a couple of such leadership insights or lesson, what would they be?
Well, I think, I was told through those two mentors to be myself. And I try to
Mm,
tell other people that. I've had, young women come to me who were very assertive, and they'll say, well,
mhm.
I've been told to tone things down. And I would say, don't tone things down. Everybody can fine tune, sure. But
Yeah,
if you try to tone down too much, you'll become something you're not, and you're not then
yeah.
going to give your best. So I really try to put, the good things that were
Mhm.
shared with me onto other people as I build teams, and whatever their traits are. You have to learn to work with people, but otherwise, don't change your core and who you are,
Mm.
because there's room for you, and that room might be as an individual contributor, it might be
Yeah.
as a team leader, but there's a spot, and that is where I think people flourish. That kind of environment is definitely where they flourish. The other thing I've taught
Mhm.
people who I have led along the way is, if you are looking to move up in a
Mm.
company, raise your hand for the things that aren't getting done. Look around, and if
Mm.
there's something that's just not getting done, or it's kind of been backburnered, and you have some
Mm.
cycles, raise your hand and jump in, even if it's not exactly in your area, because that's how you
Mm.
learn. You use your problem solving skills. And I did that all through my years at starting at GE and then at Qualcomm. And I ended up
Mm.
jumping around into different roles that eventually,
Yeah.
laddered up to
Yes.
stepping into CEO job. But
Yeah.
if I hadn't had that kind of experience, that job might not have been open to me. So it's, if you're ambitious and you want to do it, it's there. There's always something that needs doing at a company, and just raise your hand.
No, it's funny actually on the second lesson insight you shared, Peggy, because a couple of months ago I had someone I think you know well actually as well, Jean-Pascal Tricoire, the chairman, Schneider Electric.
Yeah.
You may recall meeting with him as well. And
Yes.
Jean-Pascal was sharing me on a podcast that all along his career at Schneider Electric, he took jobs that nobody wanted to take. So he basically raised his hand to take a new mission in Africa, then in China when China was like nowhere in the company,
Oh.
and he created some wonderful business growth, opportunities for the companies, and then he moved on all the way to become the CEO of the company, just like you. So I think this is a pretty good lesson in terms of leadership, stepping up and raising your hand in places where People might not expect you actually.
Yeah. And at one time in particular, I remember I was asked to lead one of our biggest accounts at Qualcomm. It needed some
Hmm.
sort of tender loving care. It had been,
Yeah.
they hadn't been listened to, and it was a huge account. I think we had maybe
Hmm.
taken them a little bit for granted.
Hmm.
And so they
Yep.
said, we need you to go in and, account manage here. But it
Yes.
was underlying, it was a sales job. And I said, well, I can't do sales. I was never very good at selling
Yeah.
candy as a kid and all that. I just can't, that's not me.
Yeah.
And they said, you know what? Just give it a shot. And I
Yeah.
would never have chosen to go there
Hmm.
if they hadn't nudged me a bit. And I just remember that feeling. I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can do this. But I did it, and I did it in my own way and left the account in better shape when, after a year or so, I moved back to the core
Hmm.
tech side. But so
Yes.
I would also say, take things that you think, can I really do this? Even if you have a little bit of misgiving and it makes you feel a little uneasy, that's okay. That's You're
Yeah.
going to learn once you step in, and you're going to learn how to do it. And you shouldn't bypass those opportunities.
No, that's so true. And like Peggy, to pursue the discussion in the way you've been basically moving as well, navigating, shifting from pure engineering jobs into business jobs. So, was there a steep learning curve for you? You just mentioned that example of taking care of what account as an example. How did you manage to do that? Because it's not necessarily easy, and it's certainly not straightforward for a female leader on top of that.
Well, it's interesting. I didn't realize that I enjoyed that until I actually did it. And again, I wouldn't have known
Hmm.
if I hadn't stepped in.
Yeah.
But I remember I was being asked to join the head of sales when we went on tech calls. At the time, we were selling a two-way satellite navigation system for trucks. So we would
Hmm.
fly all over the US and visit trucking companies and educate them on the product. It was before mobile phones, so it was a way for long
Yep.
haul trucks to talk via satellite. And it was a pretty complex topic, but they would ask me to come along and explain it to trucking companies that many times they didn't have computers
Hmm.
yet. And so
Yeah.
it was it was challenging, but I would step back and say, okay, if I'm on the other side, how would how would I digest this best?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I was had done that several times, and I remember flying back, sitting next to the sales team, and they said, you should do this more often. You should just move over to sales. And I said, no way. There's no way. The engineers were in one building at Qualcomm
Yeah.
at the time, and the salespeople in another, and they did not meet in the middle. And
Yeah.
we engineers were always wearing our Qualcomm t-shirts and jeans, and the other building was always dressed up, and we made fun of them. And so I just dug in and said, there's no way. And the leader came to me and he said, I remember the words, he said, you have antenna for this. You should
Hmm.
use it because you connect with people, and oftentimes on these complex topics, so that they can they can grasp it. So it's very intimidating if you don't understand the topic. And
Of
so
course.
I was able to get it across where they could understand it. And he said, you should
Hmm.
use that. And I remember really debating whether I would move to the other building or not for many months. And finally I just woke up one morning and said, I love doing
I'm
that. I'm passionate about it. So why not? And I'm going to have to dress up, and I'm going to have to not wear my Qualcomm t-shirt anymore and
no,
go to the other
yeah.
side.
You went to the other side.
Yes.
It's an incredible story, and it sounds like obviously you became fluent in two languages, Peggy, right? Tech and business,
Yes.
and that became one of your leadership superpowers. I think and I've seen you in action at Microsoft, so we'll come back to that, because not many people can actually span those domains so effectively, and it echoes a pattern I've seen. Where the most impactful innovation happen when someone can truly connect the deep tech to a human or a market need. And I think you're doing that so well. So I'm curious about how your engineering mindset, that problem solving that you talked about, influence the way you approach business deals and strategy today.
Yeah, so I think it's all problem solving. So when I walk into a meeting and we have to negotiate a deal, I do that same thing I did years ago. I put myself into their shoes. I
Hmm.
actually envision myself on the other side of the table looking back at me. What is important to me as the customer? What am I trying to solve? And I've obviously been listening to them and learning about what it is that is, concerning them about a
Yeah,
problem at their
yeah.
company. So how do I solve it? And if you do that, you learn to talk their language. And once, then you're on the same wavelength, and then just about
Hmm.
anything can be worked out, I've found.
Hmm.
If you get to that point where you're understanding each other. And so that is the trait that I've continued to use to this
To
day
use
when
today.
there's a tough business problem, and there's a timing issue, and there's a pricing issue, and there might be a talent issue. We can't get a team there quick enough. So what are all the things that are keeping
Hmm.
this deal from closing that a conversation might help work its way through? And I just saw that in action so many times from leaders above me when I was at Qualcomm. Erwin Jacobs, who
Yeah.
started Qualcomm, is
Hmm.
is an amazing icon, amazing leader, and I watched him uh, apply empathy to those
Hmm.
situations, and it always helped him progress forward. And so I try to model some of what I saw from him.
And obviously, it worked well because you eventually rose to sit on Qualcomm's executive committee after 2 decades. And then around 2014, an interesting inflection point came, right? Satya Nadella became CEO of Microsoft and was looking for leaders who could help transform the company's culture and nurture the growth mindset, as you may remember. So I hosted Satya in a previous episode of the podcast as well, and he talked about the importance of bringing fresh perspective into Microsoft back then. You are one of those fresh perspectives, Peggy, an accomplished outsider. And in fact, I recall reading that what drew you to Microsoft was Satya's vision of a learn it all culture and his willingness to break with old traditions, like putting Office on the iPad as an example. So, can you take us back to that decision to leave Qualcomm executive position, right, to join Microsoft at a time where Microsoft was not at its best, I must say?
Exactly. I had a lot of people questioning my my decision here in San Diego, but I was been at Qualcomm, over 2 decades. I love it here. San Diego's beautiful. Love the city. Love the company. Love the people I worked with, and I was never leaving. That was,
Hmm.
a foregone conclusion. I was never leaving, and I every time I had a recruiter reach out to me. Again, that's when we had used voicemail more. I would listen and
Yeah.
I would never call back. I'd never call back. But this one recruiter from Microsoft just kept pestering me. And I thought, I'm just going to listen. I'm not going to do anything. And
Yeah.
eventually it led to Satya calling me himself. And he said, we'd really
Hmm.
like to have you up here for a day on the campus. Uh, you know, you can come in, we'll spend some time together. You can learn about where we're headed, where I want to take the company. He was, I
Yep.
think, 3 months into his role as CEO at the time.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
And I remember coming back and, or I hadn't gone yet, but I remember thinking, I don't know who this guy is. We worked with Microsoft a lot, and
Yes.
but we worked with Steve Ballmer
Yeah.
and the tech side of the house because we sold chips to them,
Yeah.
and just had didn't know who
Didn't know
this
him.
guy Satya was. Yeah, and I remember talking to people who said, "Why would you go to Microsoft? They're not growing. They've been static for years.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think that's the right place for you." Finally, I make the move. I get on the plane in San Diego. And I remember even then feeling like I was cheating on my company. I was flying north to Seattle.
You felt guilty.
I felt so guilty. I thought, if anyone sees me in the airport, because I'm honest, what would I say? I can't say I'm going to an interview. So I tried to sneak my way through the airport. Anyway, I get up there, I meet Satya, and it was game over. There was no way I couldn't take the job. I remember we were having a discussion about the company, and I said, well, what are you going to do differently to bring the company back to growth? And I remember he thought for a moment, and I thought, what's he going to say? I'm going to make Outlook work better. I'm coming up with all of these technical things that he could do to make Microsoft better. And he said, I'm going to change the culture. And I remember thinking, what? That's never going to work. That was kind of my first thought, that he is not just going to change the culture. He's got to do other things. He's got to, do all these technical things. And he said, no. He goes, I want to make sure the company goes back to having a growth mindset again. And they're listeners and learners, and they're not always the smartest people in the room. They're the learning people in the room. And I remember thinking, I know what he's talking about, because we had interacted with Microsoft for several years, and it convinced me right then and there. And when I drove back to the airport that night, I called my husband and I said, well, we're moving to Seattle. He said, what? That was quick. That one meeting convinced me.
So wonderful, and I certainly can relate to that. Can you tell us more now about the job you had, actually? Some of the media position you as Microsoft deal maker in chief, and I will just remind our listeners that during your tenure, Microsoft made nearly 50 acquisitions, including some big ones like LinkedIn and GitHub, and forged some strategic partnerships with companies like Adobe, but also shaping some partnerships in the cloud and AI. What was your approach, Peggy, of building such strategic partnerships and negotiating those large strategic deals for the company? Again, when we think about LinkedIn today versus where people thinking about that acquisition at the time, wow, that's spectacular in terms of growth, in terms of value for the company, and value for the broader Microsoft ecosystem as well. So tell us more about the key to success.
Sure. I remember one of the first things Satya said is, I need you to be external facing. He said, you should be just spending your time out with customers. We're trying to create new partnerships. I remember him saying, I want to create some partnerships that will surprise people, because it might be a company we've been competitive at times with.
Yep.
But if there's something that would delight our customers, if our software worked better with their software, let's do it. Let's find a way to do it. So he said, go out, spend a lot of time in the Valley. Microsoft had not spent considerable time in the Valley up to that point. People would go to Seattle, go to Redmond, and not so much the other way. And he said, no, I need you just park down there, get to know folks, try to build some bridges that we haven't had in, up to this point. So I spent a lot of my first year doing that and going to companies that previously perhaps have been competitive with Qualcomm, and finding ways to link hands, really, but to create a more delightful experience for our joint customers. So we did a lot of that type of partnering. But I remember thinking, we're missing an area of early stage companies. And, we would meet them when they were 500 million or $1 billion companies, when we could have met them when they were $5 or $10 million companies. But because we didn't have the tentacles in there in the Valley. So we worked on, and Satya was very supportive of setting up a corporate venture fund that we called M12. So it was Microsoft's corporate venture fund. And that gave us that early view into so many companies, and we just became part of that network. And we set up shop in the Valley, and we became part of the get-togethers, the accelerators, the startup meetups, and that opened our eyes to a lot of interesting companies that moved very fast, and we could learn about, maybe a couple of years before we were finding them previously. So it was all about building partnerships and finding ways that we could work with young or mature companies along the way.
Yeah, and if some of you on the podcast can recall at the time, we signed some partnership with some key competitors as well, and you may want to maybe elaborate a little bit on that, Peggy, because this is the way we surprised the world. I was talking about obviously developing Office on the iPad, but there were many other things we did with companies that in the past were like the evil, right, with
Yes.
Microsoft.
Yeah.
So can you tell us the way you've been shaping some of those very new partnership principles that allowed Microsoft to finally partner with companies that we never talked to before?
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about Microsoft apps on the iPad, because the one thing I did get a lot of guidance on before I joined Microsoft was people telling me, whatever you do, don't bring an iPhone onto campus. And at the time that was okay.
Yes.
We at Qualcomm was not selling chips yet
Yeah.
at that time to Apple, so all of us had Android phones, and I thought, well, I'll be just fine. And then eventually, of course, I got a Microsoft phone my first year there. But putting, that was an earthquake type
Yeah.
of move when
Yeah.
Satya said, why wouldn't we do that? So many of our customers have iPads. Why would we not
Yeah.
get our apps to work on the iPad? So that was one of the first things that the team set about doing. And of course, you have to put a bridge in place to the other
Yeah.
company on the other side of that. And we didn't have a lot of bridges there. So I had a very talented individual on my team who worked that partnership and really brought it to the point where we could then sign a deal with Apple to bring our apps to the iPad. And it was the start then of a funnel opening
Yes.
up that allowed us to work with different types of CRM software, all different types of enterprise software that
Yes.
perhaps there were areas that we were competitive, but the larger package, that company, if they had gone in, for instance, with Salesforce software,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
had areas that were of some competition, we said, well, what about all these other areas that were not competitive? If we could just get
Yeah.
the two to work together. And so that was what we did. We looked for, you know, points of, things that weren't working well together at all. And
Yes.
again, going
Yeah.
back to delighting our customers, trying to smooth the way for them. So it just all worked, and they didn't have to think about, Salesforce software versus Microsoft software. They just
Yeah.
they had a good CRM full of APIs that just made everything very smooth. So that was a big focus for us.
Yeah, it was really a true inflection point for Microsoft as well as a platform company to show that we could actually partner with so many diverse organization companies across the industry. So now let's shift gears, Peggy. In 2020, you surprised a lot of people by making another leap, this time to become the CEO of Magic Leap, a startup famous for its mixed reality technology. So what motivated you to take on that big turnaround, by the way? And how did you assess the risk? Because there was a lot of risk actually at stake, and bring the confidence needed to raise your hand again to become the CEO for this company at the time of a global crisis, by the way.
Yeah, we were in the midst of COVID, which was a part of it,
Right.
Jean-Philippe. It really played
Yeah.
into my decision because
Hmm.
my job, which as defined by Satya was, you need to get
Yeah.
on a plane and be out there all the time, had
Be on the ground. Yes.
come to this screeching halt. I couldn't
Yeah.
get on a plane. I couldn't get in front of people. It was
Hmm.
the beginning of COVID. I immediately caught COVID. I caught COVID in March of 2020, immediately. And it was it was one of these existential moments where I said,
Hmm.
I can't see the other side of this thing.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
I can't ever do my
Yeah.
job the way I'd like to for the foreseeable future, what is my job? And of course, over
Yes.
time, you know, biz
Yeah.
dev did come back, but I couldn't see it then. This was March of 2020.
Yeah.
And there was something running through my head. There was
Hmm.
a podcast I'd listened to. I love podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
by the way, so I love this format.
Yeah.
And Valerie Jarrett in Obama's administration,
Hmm.
she had talked about how women put their own glass ceiling above them.
Hmm.
And I thought,
Hmm.
what does she mean by that? Well, one of the things I had always wanted to do was to become a CEO at some point,
Of
but I was
course.
always thinking,
Yeah.
I just need to do a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that. And I never would quite convince myself it
Be
was
ready.
time. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that collided with COVID, and I
Hmm.
decided it's time. And I made the decision before
Mm-hmm.
before looking, before anything. And one of the first people I called was Satya. And I said, look, I
Hmm.
just want you to know I just don't know what's next for me in this COVID world. I'm going
Yeah.
to start looking. And
Hmm.
he's so sweet. He always said, you know, at Microsoft, you can be the CEO of a company like right inside the company, because we had so many people. Like you looked after so many people, Jean-Philippe,
Yeah.
in your tenure. You can have.
Yes.
There's huge companies
Yeah.
at Microsoft. One division is
Of
huge,
course.
and I said, I understand that, Satya, but this is something I've always wanted to do. My head's bumping against that glass ceiling. I'm putting this ceiling in place. I'm going to bust it open. I'm going to start looking.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
when I came back and said, this is what I looked at a lot of cloud enterprise companies, but
Yeah.
I felt like for me, they just weren't as exciting as augmented
Hmm.
reality. And I love
Yeah.
hardware. And I thought, this company needs a lot of help. I don't know if I'm going to be successful, but I have an idea and I'm going to give it a shot and
Hmm.
I'm going to say yes. And I remember when I called Satya to tell him, he said, "Are you sure?" It seems early.
To go for this company.
Yeah, it seems a
Some
little
early
early.
innovation.
Yeah. So I said, well, yeah, it's probably early, but I'm really fascinated by the technology. And
Yeah.
and so I made the leap, no pun intended, and was there for
Yeah.
about 3 years.
Yeah. So just again, maybe it would be great to share a bit with our listeners, Peggy, the context, because I think when you were in the CEO seat at Magic Leap, the first year was about steadying the ship. There were layoffs, the need to raise new funding, and a pivot to execute. And so you basically stepped into a crisis, a big crisis, right? And at the
Yes.
time of COVID. So can you tell us more about some of the big leadership lessons you took from steering again that pivot largely remotely, by the way, and holding the vision while making some very tough calls for this company?
Well, I go back to what I learned from Satya when he said, I'm going to change the
Hmm.
culture. So I was stepping into a company that was very bruised. They had gone from
Hmm.
about 2,000 employees to about 1,000, and the cuts had been made swiftly. And when that happens, they're jagged cuts, right? They're too deep in one
Yeah.
area, maybe not deep enough in others, to hit their financial goals. So the team was in a bit of disarray. The company itself wasn't quite sure what it wanted to be when it grew up. It was
Hmm.
pursuing consumer and enterprise um, products. And I
Yeah.
felt like it just needed to focus. It needed to not try and be all end all of augmented reality.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
find product market fit and focus in one area. And that turned out to
Hmm.
be enterprise and largely
Yes.
training type of applications. And so we
Hmm.
brought things way, way down to that. But we listened. We spent a lot of time with the employees. Both myself and my leadership team had skip level meetings. We made sure that we were always bubbling up what the issues were. Because it
Hmm.
was COVID times, we were still remote,
Yeah.
and it was, we were on the brink of not having enough funding for the coming year. So there was that problem
Hmm.
too. And
Yeah.
so I had to, you know, buckle down and start to look for funding. And within the first year, we did bring in enough to last for another couple of
Yeah.
years and settled, just, tried to settle all areas, the tech area, the organization, the financial situation.
Yeah.
And just, I had a great team. I'll tell you, it's interesting when you have so many issues. It's
Yeah.
almost exciting to try and work them all. I felt like,
Yeah.
at Microsoft, if we had a marketing issue, we could say to the marketing department, well, can you go fix this? And then you didn't really have to think about it anymore because the marketing department was going to fix it. And at Magically, we were the marketing department. Everything
Yeah,
landed.
to do everything.
Yeah. You had
Yes.
to wear a lot of hats, but it was so much fun. Every day was something different. There were high highs, there were low lows, but I loved the journey. It was
It was a true entrepreneurship job, wasn't it? I mean, a true entrepreneur.
definitely
Yeah.
early
Yeah.
tech, as Satya had pointed
Yeah.
out, still evolving.
Yeah.
And I think, it will definitely become a part of our lives at some point. But like any good tech, it'll evolve over many years,
Yeah.
and we'll see more of it.
So talking about that, actually, love to get your point of view, Peggy, given the fact that you spent 3 years there, obviously, and you sit in a unique position of having seen both basically, the real value of augmented reality, mixed reality, but also the hype that happened at the time of the metaverse. So with this new AI era, how do you see the true potential of augmented reality or mixed reality? Uh, and the so-called metaverse, if it still exists somewhere.
Yeah,
What is it now?
it's
What is
interesting.
it becoming now? Yeah.
I think we're seeing where it's going with Meta's product. Their most recent
Yeah.
product is actually pretty amazing. Yeah, I think it's the right form factor. It sort of looks like normal glasses. That was always part of the problem with augmented
Yeah.
reality because nobody wanted to wear that big headset, and they tended to be heavy and hot. Though Magic Leaps was lighter and not as hot, but really for wide adoption, you need a form factor that people are comfortable with. That turns out to be glasses, and I think eventually it will be contacts. We already have seen several companies that are incorporating augmented reality, early
Yep.
stages, but into contacts. And I feel like it's how it will augment our lives is we'll go back to having more of a heads up view of the world. Everybody still has their heads down too much in their phones
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
navigating small screens. And augmented reality can put you back into your world. You have a heads up view. And I think we'll do a much better job of filtering the type of data that's presented to you when you have the device on, which again, I think Meta's done a very good job of. It's just
Yes.
the data you need at that moment and at that location, and not just a fire hose of content, which we can get on our phones, which can be distracting and overwhelming, and as
Yes.
we start
Yes.
to realize, some of the hazards of that, I think this idea of augmented reality with just the data you need at just the moment you need it is going to really help us throughout our days and not overwhelm us, which our phones can do at times.
Yes. Yes. No, interesting the way you position that, particularly standing up and looking the world from the top as opposed to looking down. Very interesting.
Yes.
I think physically, emotionally as well.
Yeah.
Now, I'd like to switch gears, Peggy, and look to the future of technology, obviously, that you're helping shape. There's fascinating convergence happening today between AI and the physical world. Recent analysis suggested the next era of AI will take physical form with the rise of humanoid robots and breakthrough in embodied AI, closing the gap between digital intelligence and the real world. So, as the CEO of Agility Robotics, you're literally at the forefront of giving AI a body, real body. And your company builds robots that work alongside humans. And you publicly stated that humanoid robots like Agility's Digit are aimed at filling jobs that humans do not want or where there are labor shortages rather than displacing people. Um, so I'd like you to really share the way you see those technologies, again, with AI and robotics, reshaping the future of work and society. What is it today, and what should we expect tomorrow?
Right, right. So I believe the labor market will be forever changed. And I think, a good analogy is electronic vehicles. I do believe at
Mhm.
some point we will all look back and say, remember when we used to drive our own cars? That was so unsafe because humans make mistakes, and we won't at some point entrust ourselves anymore, to driving cars. There may be events, let's all go drive cars
Yep.
one weekend, but it's not going to be um, our standard practice. We will at some point, I believe, always get into uh, electronic vehicles that have digital drivers,
Yep.
essentially. And so
Yep.
um, labor is a very similar type of field, and the
Mm.
initial foray into it with humans is to fill a big labor gap. And I don't know if people know how much there's this labor gap has been growing, but it's been growing in two areas: manufacturing
Mm.
facilities, which
Yep.
as people retire, young people don't want those jobs. That's not something they would generally choose. They are looking for
Yep.
perhaps something in more of the digital space. And so the
Mhm.
gap there has been growing for many years. And then logistics facilities. So think of Amazon warehouses, third party logistics
Mhm.
providers. Through COVID, we really stressed
Mm.
them. We wanted our products, we wanted them quickly.
Mm.
2 day became the norm, and then 2 hour in some big cities has become the norm. And all of that puts a heavy burden on any humans working in those facilities. Now,
Mm.
you might say, well, most of those facilities are highly automated, and they are. But if you walk
Yep.
into them, you'll see sort of what we call islands of automation. There might be a conveyor belt over here, and then
Mhm.
a moving robotic cart. They call them autonomous mobile
Yep.
robots, AMRs, over here. And then there's a human in between that's
Mm.
picking up the box from the conveyor belt and loading
Mm.
it onto the cart, because they were deployed at different times from different companies, and there's just not a connector there. So
Yep.
at this point in time, those jobs are also growing, and just the ones in
Mm.
the logistics area, I think there's over 1 million jobs now in the US alone, in that area
Mm.
alone, that are going unfilled. And what that means is the people who are there tend to do double shifts. They tend to get
Yep.
hurt more often. And these jobs are repetitive. They can be somewhat mind numbing. They can be dirty,
Mm.
but very, very injury prone. And so it's the perfect spot for a humanoid to step in. And why humanoids is because they have to step into where humans operate. So the world is built for
Mm.
humans, waist high things and overhead shelves. And the humanoid has to be able to handle those same needs
Mm.
that a human would if they were walking into a narrow aisle with an overhead shelf. And they can, right now, they are capable of that type of work. um, AI supercharged everything, because teaching it new
Yep.
skills used to be
Yep.
a computer and an
Mm.
engineer coding the software that said, okay,
Yep.
now turn right, turn left. With AI, we can learn by demonstration, we can teleoperate. There's a
Mhm.
lot of different ways where we can simulate operations and very, very quickly teach the robot new skills, which means it can very quickly be deployed into
Mm.
areas completely new to it, and
Mm.
operate capably.
So, to you, Peggy, obviously you have quite an optimist view of the workplace, and you said those robots are just going to get into jobs that nobody wants to do. Isn't it a bit kind of restrictive in a sense that you still have people doing those jobs today, right? In the US, in other countries. So how do you see that kind of combination happening as well? Because there might be some of those jobs where robots will be combined with people as well, the same way we see agents, AI agents working with, basically white collars in businesses, in organizations. So how does this kind of combination of humans and robots work together on a manufacturing floor or logistic floor, as an example.
Yeah. So think of it as a tool, and a tool that
Hmm.
can augment humans' daily lives. So these type of jobs I've been describing oftentimes are tasks inside someone's job. So they might not do that
Yep.
for 8 hours a day over and over again, but they might for a few hours, and then they might go
Hmm.
and fulfill something else around the warehouse or the logistics facility. So the idea is in these very manual, very repetitive parts of their jobs, let's bring the
Hmm.
humanoid in. And what can the human do? Well, now they have cycles open up to do a number of things. One of them, which is, as we found in our early deployments, becoming a robot fleet manager. So there
Hmm.
needs to be someone who looks after already all of the automation in a
Yep.
facility. A
Yep.
robot is another piece of automation. It steps
Hmm.
in. We have a platform that connects to the warehouse management
Hmm.
system. And what we end up doing is training people who used to have a wholly manual job,
Yeah.
and they're switching over to most of their job becomes digital. And it's actually a new
Hmm.
career path for them, one they never thought that they would have
Yeah.
uh, an opportunity to step into. So there's been some good
Hmm.
outcomes there.
No, let's talk about some of the biggest risks that we still need to mitigate when it comes again to robots, so that humans never become servants to the machine. Where should we set guardrails so human dignity and agency are preserved as AI robotics scale, not just in the US, but in China, in Asia? We see there's that wave happening actually.
Right. There's a couple areas. First and foremost is just the physical safety of humans around
Yep.
robots. These things are uh, very big. They're human size.
Yep.
They weigh a lot. Our initial ones weighed about 160. We're moving to our next gen
Hmm.
that weighs about 200 pounds. So we
Wow.
have quite a, the mass to these robots.
Yes.
And if they should stumble and fall, which happens with robots now and then, it could very much damage a human. So to this
Hmm.
point, so far, humanoids have had to operate inside of a work cell. So it's just one of
Yep.
those, waist high barriers that humans don't go in. It's like any factory, there's a
Hmm.
line or a barrier that says, don't
Yep.
cross this line. There's a lot of moving automation
Hmm.
over there. So the robot is inside that, and it's working to move product in there.
Hmm.
But the next step is something called cooperatively safe robots, which means it is
Hmm.
allowed to be in the proximity of humans. So it
Hmm.
might be told to go down to the loading dock and pick something up. And as it's going down the aisleway, you might be coming
Yep.
the other way, and it needs to take appropriate action so that it doesn't,
Hmm.
you know, to get
Bump into you. Yeah.
anyway bump
Yeah.
into you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
should you get too close to it and somehow it
Hmm.
stumbles, it has to be able to fall away from a human. And all of these things are highly complex. They also have very powerful arms and legs, and so you
Hmm.
have to ensure that they're under control at all times as a human approaches. It's a highly complex problem to solve in
Hmm.
a dynamically stable humanoid robot.
Yes.
A little bit easier if it's on a cart, but when it's walking, it's a bigger problem. So that will need to be solved before
Yep.
humans can really be, in the proximity. But also, there's, I mean, and you touched on it. What is this going to mean when
Hmm.
these robots are
Hmm.
in our lives? How do we interact with them?
Yes.
We've tried to do a few things with the idea of our robot. First of all, ours is painted sort of a teal color, which tends to be a little calming color.
Yep.
It's not doesn't look like the Terminator from
Hmm.
movies. We've all seen the robot movies that when things go awry,
Yeah.
and we also have put a head on it. But it's interesting
Hmm.
when the company made its third generation, it started with just two
Yep.
legs, and then when it put on a
Yep.
torso and arms, the engineer said, well, we don't really need a head because the camera's in the torso. But can you
Yeah.
imagine what this would look like, walking along with two arms and two
Without a head,
legs and
yes.
no head? So we put a head on. And,
Huh.
and also humans,
Hmm.
the way humans interact with other humans is you turn and you look at
Yeah.
their head. And so they needed
Yes.
something to look at, and the eyes should be looking back. And there is a
Yes.
lot of new learnings that will happen in this area,
Mm.
how humans
Hmm.
interact with these
Interact.
humanoid
Yes.
devices. And I think we saw a little bit of it in uh, electronic vehicles when we first
Yep.
started to
Mm.
incorporate things like voice commands, and that some things didn't
Yep.
work quite right, but over time
Yep.
now they work pretty good. And the self-driving
Mm-hmm.
mode, it's getting better and
Yep.
better. And so we're going to see the same sort of thing as we introduce
Mm.
more and more capabilities to these humanoids.
Yes.
What will humans react to positively, and what will they shrink from? And we
Mm.
want to make sure that
Mm.
the experience is a positive experience, because these can be of great help to humans, but you never want to scare
Of
anybody
course.
away from using them.
Yeah. So there's probably still a lot of training to be done, right, between robots and humans to
Yes,
understand that collaboration between both of them, basically.
exactly.
So, zooming out now, Peggy, and talking about competitiveness, China has scaled industrial robotics at breathtaking speed, and is pushing hard on components, manufacturing, and deployment. While the US leads in frontier AI models, system integration, but trails in manufacturing. China now accounts for 54% of global industrial robot installations in 2024, and a surge in robot density and patenting as well. And this competition is going to shape supply chains as well, standards, and the pace of humanoids at work. So, how do you view today US versus China competitiveness in robotics and embodied AI? And where should the US actually uh, double down in terms of manufacturing, innovation, safety standards, investment, private public partnership, or whatever, to stay competitive while keeping systems open, secure, and interoperable?
Right. So there's a lot there. In China, they've been masters of automation for a long time. Obviously, their factories
Yeah.
are marvels. And humanoids are newer to that picture. We see a lot of
Mm.
new companies starting out in China, being supported by the government. They have a mandate to really supercharge their humanoid robotics field.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will say that the early ones generally they're fantastic devices for teaching robotics. So they have
Mm.
high
Mm.
dexterity, great manipulation. But most of the humanoids that have come out of China recently are somewhat smaller, and they're not able to do the type of work that we are in fulfilling that labor
Yeah.
gap. So in order to, they kind of have to grow up if they're going to take on that kind of job. So that's one thing. The
Mm.
physical actuators
Physical.
have to be able to
Yeah.
pick up to 50 pounds, that sort of thing. They'll get there for sure, but the early ones are generally lighter weight. They move lighter
Mm.
weight things.
Mhm.
The other thing is safety. We know the bar that we have to meet. Where one of our partners is
Yeah.
Amazon. They have a very high safety bar, and we've become
Mm.
a better company because of us having to
Of
meet that
course.
safety bar.
Yeah.
And so we know what it takes to operate in these environments, to be enterprise hardened, to meet all of the
Hmm.
compliance and the regulatory bars in these places, and then the
Hmm.
even higher bar that Amazon has in their facilities. So we work hard at the enterprise hardened side of it, the true
Mm.
commercialization side. And
Yes.
that, we believe, is the entry point into teaching these
Mm.
humanoids more and more over time,
Mm.
opening up more and more enterprise segments, and then eventually in the home. I frankly think it's
Mm.
early days to
Yeah.
bring robots into homes, because homes are very chaotic. There's dogs and babies and balls rolling around, and
Yeah.
they could someone could move the couch from one day to the next, and all of that presents hurdles for robots in the home. And I think
Yeah.
uh, they will eventually be there. They will become our companions in many ways, but not uh, in the near term in the home. I think we're a ways
But
off.
we see some of them in Japan, right? I was just back from a trip in Japan, and And you see robots in a home taking care of, aging people, as an example, healthcare scenarios. And even in the US, there was this recent product introduction as well, right, of this robot taking care of your washing machine or whatever you have at home. You still see that as too early and premature?
I do. I think there's a safety bar
Mm,
that must be met before these can be widely
mm.
adopted. The one product that you're speaking of in the U.S. Is still teleoperated, which means somebody not
Yes,
located will be operating the robot. So
remotely. Yeah.
I'm
Mm.
speaking about autonomous robots working in our
Really
homes.
autonomous robots. Yes.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think we're a ways off. And one of the big issues,
Okay.
Jean-Philippe, is data.
Yeah.
Data
Yeah.
is what you need to
Yes.
train the foundation models, which is what you need to teach these robots new skills.
Mm,
As that data lake grows, we will have more and more opportunity to teach skills more
yeah.
quickly. But we're pretty low amounts of data at this point in the
Mm.
humanoid robotics field.
So more to learn about that interaction, and lots more data to consume before buying a robot at home.
Yes.
Okay, so wait a few more years.
Yes.
So now, Peggy, I'd like to get into the last segment of our podcast, which is all about positive leadership. One of the key foundations of that leadership philosophy is the leader's why. One of the guests I had about a year ago, I think is Ron Gigulati, who wrote this book called Deep Purpose. And obviously, you know what purpose is all about. It is the operating system that really steadies tough decision in turbulence and fuels resilience when outcomes take time. So I'd like to know, what is your core purpose as a leader, Peggy, and how do you keep it front and center through the ups and downs?
Right. There are a lot of ups and downs, and particularly in small companies. Every day
Yeah.
is a crisis, and every day there's the highest level of joy. So there's sort of both of those things going on. We have also the added complication, if you will, of working with new
Mm,
technology and building a new field. We had that with augmented reality. We also have that with humanoid robots. So uh, for me, it feels very much like the early days of mobile phones. And
mm.
in the beginning, mobile phones were just meant to make a phone call from anywhere, and that was the exciting thing that we were going to be
Yeah.
able to solve.
Yeah.
And when we solved for that, that was the be all end all. And I remember Erwin Jacobs saying one day, we might there might someday be 1 million mobile phones in the world. And that was as big as we could think, because at the time
Yeah.
we thought
Yeah.
it was going to be a replacement for phone booths. And so, okay,
Hmm.
about 1 million phone booths in the world, maybe 1 million mobile phones. And we just couldn't see uh,
Hmm.
beyond, the horizon that we could see over.
Yeah.
So one of the things when we're working in these kind of chaotic environments is
Hmm.
I like to regroup the team often and
Hmm.
celebrate the small wins, because
Hmm.
the sometimes the big losses can really knock you back, and the
Yeah.
swings are wider in a small startup company than in a larger more mature company.
For sure. Yeah.
So it's really important that you gather frequently, and there's a
Hmm.
sense of optimism about where we're headed. And even though we can't quite see exactly the path there, for
Hmm.
instance, how do we get exactly to a consumer robot, which we know we'll get to? What
Hmm.
is that
Hmm.
path of getting there? What do we have to navigate? Let's celebrate the small wins along the way to that path. And
Yes.
that
Yeah.
tends to keep people motivated and excited about the next day and the next day, and not fearful of
Hmm.
maybe a macro
Yeah.
thing going on that can really knock you back.
Yeah. Which can be overwhelming. Now, when it comes to your own why, Peggy, you as a leader, Peggy Johnson, how would you define your purpose personally?
Yeah, I have always liked to work in an area that I feel if I do a good job, this will help my fellow humans. Like it has to be very
Hmm.
tangible for me. And
Hmm.
I felt that, in my mobile phone days, I definitely felt that at Microsoft, as we added more and more capability, I felt that it magically through augmented reality, and I do feel that robots will be a positive influence in humans' lives. And
Mm.
obviously, while we're focused on enterprise right now, that's just the start.
Yeah.
I mean, you can imagine
Yes.
elder care, where we have an aging population the world over
Oh
and
yeah.
a slowing birth rate.
Mm.
And if we can get this right, we can have companions, maybe not
Yeah.
100% of the time, but at least a good part of a day, a companion that can stay with an elderly person, make sure they're taking their meds, take care of them until the human can come home a bit later, and versus
Mm.
just being lonely for several hours during the day and on their own and unable to maybe do for themselves. That's just one
Mm.
area where I think we can very positively impact
Mm.
what is going to be a growing issue for us in the coming few decades.
And do you believe that that purpose that you bring to your job every day is really lifting up your team and giving them again some actually really excitement to go after this impossible mission in a way, because that seems like wow,
And
huge undertaking.
yeah, it is a huge undertaking. And, on any given day, your confidence can be shaken because something's not working. There's a piece of hardware that's not working, or a customer
Yeah.
said, I want a completely different use case, and you're back at square zero. And all of these things can knock you back. But if you keep your eye on where you're going and what you can do for humanity, that is energizing,
Mm.
and it tends to smooth
Mm.
out those bumps along the way. um, and
Mm.
and it is why I like to celebrate the small wins, because they're just
Mm.
as important as the bumps for learning from a learning standpoint. And if we keep our eye on the future and how we're going to impact humanity, um, it makes this so exciting. It's a technology that's
Yeah.
going to have a massive impact, and we're at the start of it, and we're shaping it, and we're part of watching it grow. So again, very much
Yes.
that feeling like I felt with mobile phones in the beginning, when it was just about making a phone call, and now it's a PC in our pocket. And like, how do we get from here to there? That journey was exciting. It's great to be part of something like that.
For sure. So, talking about your leadership, Peggy, I've been always really amazed by your authenticity. I mean, you are someone who is sincerely authentic. I mean, you are who you are, and you are really opening up in every connection. So, what does authenticity mean for you as a leader, and how do you practice it to build trust with your teams, people, customers, and any other constituency you have to work with?
Well, it's interesting. I'll go back to that one mentor of mine who said, you just need to be allowed to be yourself. Because what was
Be
happening,
yourself.
yeah, in the early days of
Yeah.
my career, is people were telling me, be more assertive. You got to speak up more in meetings. You need to do this. You need to do that. And it was things that I was uncomfortable with because it wasn't part of my core personality. And once I was allowed to be myself, that was when I was able to really progress in my career, because things were static there for a while. I wasn't meeting the
Mm.
bar for the performance reviews. I couldn't figure out a way forward. And once I was allowed to just be myself, that made all the difference for me. So that is something
Mm.
that I like to impart on all of my leaders, the company. It's okay to be who you are, because when you're comfortable,
Mm.
you do your best work. And obviously, when you do
Yeah.
your best work, there's growth and success and opportunity. So I try to you know, have that motto first for both myself still today, as well
Mm.
as my employees who sometimes feel like,
Mm.
well, I need to do things in a completely different way, but they're not comfortable with it because it's not core to their being. And
Yes.
there's no reason to change your core at all.
Yeah. No, I love it. And it's really a nice bridge to the positive psychology principles, Peggy. I would just mention a few of them: purpose that we discussed, gratitude, strengths focus, optimism, resilience, driving a positive impact as well. So, how do you intentionally embody such principles as a leader, and how do you do that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always been a runner, and every morning
Mm.
I run, and I think when I'm
Hmm.
running and I plan for my day, and I think of those things you just talked about, the gratitude I
Yeah.
have for the team that's working with me, the company, their talent, their sheer brain power. I'm thankful for all of that. We wouldn't be the company we are today without that.
Mm.
But then the resilience that I'm going to need in the day
Yeah.
ahead, because every day has its challenges. You may need to have a difficult conversation with
Yeah.
an employee or a customer, and knowing that you're going to disappoint the other side with the message. But you have to keep forward. You have to have grit and determination. And so that time alone, and other
Mm.
people meditate, some people
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
out with weights. I run, and then I
Yes.
run. I just work through all of those things for my day
Mm.
ahead. I get everything lined up, and then I deploy. And then at the end of the day,
Then you hit.
yeah, at the end of the day, I kind of do a recap. Did I do everything I
Yes.
want? I make lists of things. I have a list right here of things that I have to get
Yellow
through
pad, a
today.
yellow
It's
pad, yes.
silly. I have all this digital work in front of me, and I have a yellow pad and a pen, because as soon as it comes to my mind,
Yeah.
I write it down. But that's
I, I, I,
yeah, that's it.
yeah. I love those routines, by the way, Peggy. Any other routines you have or habits that keep you again energized and grounded every day so that you can lead positively and sustainably week after week and despite some ups and downs?
I think podcasts, I'll go back to what I said earlier, are a
Okay,
fabulous
interesting.
way for me to
Listening to
learn, to
podcast.
listen. I
Yeah.
and I
Ah,
purposely listen to all sides of a political
yeah.
argument.
Sorry. Yeah,
And I always learn something.
yeah.
You might think, well, I there's nothing I have in common with that person. And then you listen to a podcast. It's longer. They always say it's longer than you have sound bites for a podcast. So as you're interviewing
Yeah.
me, I've run out of sound bites. Though, I don't have any of those, because you go for a longer format, and you get to the true core of a person, and you hear their authentic self, because
Hmm.
there's no more inputs. It's just
Yes.
them. And
Yeah.
so for
Yeah.
me, that's a big learning tool I have. And it could be
Hmm.
political, it could be technical, it could be
Yeah.
society, it could be a global topic. But I bounce around. I listen to everybody, literally everybody. And I do try to listen to both sides.
I love podcasts too, by the way, Peggy. Beyond my own podcast, I listen to a bunch of podcasts, same way.
Yeah.
So, my last couple of questions, because I want to make sure I leave you with your customers, teams, people. You have so much to accomplish with your robots, Peggy. Uh, when you look at the compounding ways of AI and some of the big questions in the world, climate change, shifting geopolitics, if positive leadership became the default rather than the exception, how would 2030 would look like? How would it change? Or leadership allocate capital, govern technology, decarbonize operations, measure success? How would that look
Oh
like
my,
in your mind?
I think the impact could be phenomenal if we focus more on the positive, focus on finding a
Hmm.
way toward a solution rather than just vilifying the other side and then shutting the door and
Yes.
not listening
Yeah.
anymore, because all that does is take
Hmm.
up time, and we don't have that kind of time. We have big problems facing
No, we
us.
don't.
We need to work together on them, and if we can't be civil and have healthy discourse, where are we? And so I'm always looking to find the good in everybody, every topic, learning. The more I learn, the more I feel like I can, incorporate that back into my
Hmm.
decision making. So I think 2030 would be fabulously different in a very good way if we could push forward with more positive leadership
Yeah.
and finding solutions rather than shutting doors.
Love it. So my very last question now, I promise you. What is next on your journey, and what are 3 positive leadership tips that you would like to pass on to the next generation of leaders listening to us, Peggy?
Wow. Next on my journey, probably I've always wanted to do something, a business with my family. So with my husband and my 3 kids, and just sort of
Yep.
take all the
Yep.
learnings that I've had over my career through these mini careers
Hmm.
and incorporate and set something up there. And I don't know what that is. We've had a lot of debates about that over dinners, but I think that would be so gratifying, and so that likely will be on my list. Um, I think, positive traits, obviously, be a listener, be a learner, be
Hmm.
empathetic. It's everybody is going through things. So that last one is
Hmm.
probably the most important to me. Show some
Hmm.
empathy. One of my favorite words is grace. Give people the grace
Hmm. Of
to,
grace. Yes.
yeah, to,
Yeah.
you know, to stumble, and it's okay, and
Hmm.
give them the
Hmm.
grace to say something silly and not hold it against them. Like give people a little more
Yeah.
boundaries rather than tightening those
Yes.
boundaries, and we can get a lot more
Yeah.
done as a society.
Well, I look forward to that, well, Peggy. Thank you so much, Peggy. It's been such a joy to reconnect with you, first of all, learning from your leadership journey from mobile, AR, to cloud, to robotics, always with people and purpose at the center. And I could feel it in this discussion. I can feel your positive vibes, and it's going to bring us to a better world. So thank you to our listeners again for listening this exciting episode with Peggy. And if you love this episode, please leave a rating. A 5 stars is welcome always, and subscribe to the Positive Leadership podcast as well, and the newsletter. Until the next time, stay positive and keep leading with purpose, and take care of yourself. Thank you again, Peggy. It was a wonderful moment.
Thanks for having me, Jean-Philippe.